So thank you so much for joining us tonight for Ballets Arts Initiative Artist Conversation, the latest installment with Arkady Lvov. In case you don't know me, I'm Anna Winestein. I'm the executive director and the co-founder of Ballets Arts Initiative. We're based in Boston, and we seek to connect the U.S. and Eurasia through the visual and performing arts. I should just very briefly mention a plug for our next program, which is going to be on Sunday, April 25th. It's a concert, a virtual concert recorded at Faneuil Hall as part of our partnership with the Ancient Honorable Artillery Company. It's a violin and piano concert, and it's dedicated also to the memory of Gordon Langton, the founder of the Museum of Russian Icons, who sadly passed away in the beginning of March. So we're going to be on Gordon a little bit and, introducing you to some Lithuanian and Ukrainian compositions, as well as some Ravel. So it's going to be a great time. I hope you can join us. At this point, I think it's time for me to turn the floor over to Arkady, so he can start telling you.
She sings about the Ballets Russes.
And I'm going to start sharing screen.
What?
I think we're good to go. So let me get the screen up. Okay, excellent. So see an image, and now it doesn't want to advance. Okay, Arkady.
Okay. Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. It's my pleasure to have you all and talk a little bit about what I'm doing. So the first image here you see on the screen is called "In Memory of My Parents," and that brings me back to my roots, where I came from. I was born and raised in Odessa, Ukraine, a beautiful city by the sea. Some call it Little Paris. It's a big international port and a sea resort, and a very cultural, very European city in the south of Ukraine. And in these still lives, I collected objects which remind me of my childhood. When I left Russia, I wasn't allowed to take much stuff with me. So none of those objects actually came from my home, but they are very nostalgic to me. Like, for example, a scissors you see here looks almost exactly the same as scissors my grandmother used to use. She was a very accomplished seamstress. My parents had collection of seashells, naturally picked up by the shores of Odessa. The inkwell, although much older, remind me of the inkwell I used in the elementary school. We didn't have ball pens at that time in Russia. We had some old photographs of my grandparents and grandparents, and the daguerreotype here sort of remind me of those. A little Turkish coffee maker. I had a very similar one at home. So everything else everything here, I should say, is very nostalgic, except for the little monkey skull, which was a present from the friend. When I was in Odessa, my dream was to become an art historian, actually. And I went to Petersburg, enrolled into Russian, what used to be a Russian Imperial Academy of Art, and at my days it was known as the Repin Institute, and studied the history of art there. But then a year later, I made a very strong decision to immigrate, to leave Russia. So I left Art Academy and started working towards that goal. It wasn't easy at that time, but I managed a few years later. And I came to New York and started working as a freelance photographer and also as an assistant to a very famous Russian artist, Mikhail Shemyakin. A few years later, when my English grew up and I feel more confident, I enrolled in the Parsons School of Design. And I studied photography there for 5 years. And I always been interested in classical still life, even back in Russia. I was fascinated. It was like a mystery to me. And my other passion was techniques of 19th century photography. I was fascinated by that as well. And at my first semester at Parsons, I saw in the catalog that they teaching a technique called platinum printing. And I immediately took it up because I thought that would be a perfect medium for my still lifes. And I started that project back in Parsons. Still life is really a fascinating thing. Like one of the subjects of still life called vanitas. A presence of skull in still life should have remind a 17th, 16th century people looking at that still life that we are all mortals and we're going to die and we have to think about our next life and not to sin and so on and so forth. Of course, in our time, it's represent death, of which we've all been very well reminded in the last year, losing people we know to COVID and stuff like that. So that's one of the subject of my still lives, not necessarily skull, like you can see here a dead bird. And that still life was a dead bird, and another one at the cover page is a part of the series I call Inside the White Box. So while at Parsons, I got more and more involved into intricacy of platinum printing. It's a fascinating technique where images formed by actual platinum metal, by molecules of platinum, brush onto beautiful art paper. And I start specializing in it. And a couple of years after I graduated, I opened my first printmaking studio because other photographers start asking me to print, make platinum prints for them. You see, when I started, I was only studying for myself, mainly for my still life project. But I find out that this rare printing technique is in great demand. And at the same time, my professor from whom I learned platinum printing, Lois Conner, left Parsons to teach at Yale. And the head of the photography department asked me if I would be interested to take her position there and teach course on platinum print. So I was doing actually three things. I was doing freelance photography and printmaking to support myself, and I was teaching platinum. I think we went a little bit faster, Anna, because we already moved to the next subject of our discussion.
Well, I could keep you on time by moving the slides, so
yeah, of course, no problem there. I just trying to keep pace, and that's Venetian Carnivale. That famous Russian artist Shemyakin I was mentioning a few minutes ago, in 1993, went for his exhibition of his own work, which was timed as a carnival, become absolutely fascinated with it, and insists that next year, me and my wife and group of other friends would come for Carnival with him. We came, were totally blown away by what we saw. And I started that project because I was fascinated by it, but also slightly out of, I could say, out of desperation. I was looking for a good book on a carnival and couldn't find one. What I saw was those slightly vulgar costumes, you know, from posters and photographs. And at the same time, I saw amazingly creative costumes on the squares and streets of Venice, which wasn't in any book. And I started my own book project and start recording and photographing those incredible carnival characters. And you can see some of them here. Some wearing masks, some don't because they have amazing faces, which in my view does not require any mask. They more interesting than any mask can be. But also I was very much impressed how much work people put into those elaborate costumes, spending months creating them, decorating with different details, and so on and so forth, and pouring so much creativity into them. And the carnival basically lasts for 11 days. All this tremendous work done strictly out of the enthusiasm for the carnival, which goes back way to 13th, 14th centuries, and it's oldest carnival in the world. Venetians actually invented that. It was forbidden after Napoleon took over Venice, but then it was recreated, resurrected, I should say, by people, Venetian people in 1970s. Now it's a huge commercial enterprise, but there is the core of carnival enthusiasts who come in every year. We know those people, like for example here, in that horizontal image on the right, you can see, this is a friend of ours from Petersburg. His name is Arkady Lvov. He's a head of the mime theater there. And he came to the carnival. The costume was made by Shemyakin's sketches. It's kind of connotation of the Joker, but in Shemyakin's own interpretation. And he performed in this costume on the San Marco Square in front of the cathedral. And there is a whole group of us which come in for, some people come in like me for over 25 years, 26 years. It's become a meeting ground, a reunion of friends who love Carnival. And those costumes, the creativity of people, like on the left, you can see that entire head is made out of the neckties. Or on the right, this woman, she knitted her costumes. In the middle, it's a mannequin in the window, but you don't know that immediately because it's almost look like a you know, Venetian courtesan. So that's endless fascination, because every year you go to Carnival and you see amazing new costumes, and photographing them and look at them is just a great pleasure, one of the height of the year for me. So the book never happened, but I had an exhibition a few years back in New York Gallery, and hopefully it will result into something else. So that's a Carnival project. Now we're moving to a next chapter, which also connected to Venice. That's another series of mine called Venice at Night. Venice, a very, very lively city, especially during the Carnival. But if you walk those streets in the middle of the night, you hardly see a soul there. And architecture become more visible, more noticeable, almost magical, especially when the fog come from the lagoon. You think you are in some kind of dream or fairy tale. And this series is as much about Venetian architecture as about the light of Venice at night. And talking about going back to the opening image of still life dedicated to my parents, the image on the left is also very nostalgic because at the building where I lived for 25 years almost until I left Odessa, in a courtyard, we had very similar looking water fountain. And when I start seeing those water fountains in the little campus of Venice, that's also brought me back. So that's a nostalgic image. The image on the right is arcades of the old Venetian Rialto market, which again goes back to 12th, 11th centuries. You can see similar arcades on Venetian paintings of Francesca Guardi. One is in the Metropolitan Museum. And now there are some cafes, but used to be storage places, warehouses. This is a little gallery on the right, which exhibit artworks on paper, but if you look closer at the column on, right in the dead center, you can see a little relief of shoes. It used to be a cobbler shop. The image on the right is just a canal at night with a mystery figure under the light in the center. Oh, this is a funny story. The image on the left, that blackout door, is on immediate right of the entrance to the building where we used to rent an apartment on the top floor. We come into Venice, we never stay in a hotel. It's always rented apartment because you feel a little bit like you live in that city, even if for 14 days or something like that. And I saw that door. It was like, to me, it was like a Anthony Tapia's painting or something. It was right there. Didn't have to go far, right in the building where we stayed. So that was night. And on the right is another canal at night with a little tiny window on top lit. Probably somebody still awake in the all sleep in Venice. So that's that. Now we can move to a next and a last chapter of our presentation. And this is a series called The Last Ball, which give title to this whole event. And in a way, it was the last ball. It's from my last trip to Venice, which was at the end of February, beginning of March of the last year. Pandemic hardly was here yet. So we left without a second thought. We came to Venice. The Carnival was in a full bloom. Week later, we went to a fabulous Venetian ball, probably one of the best balls I ever attended there, and we went to many. Going to ball in Venice is the height of the Carnival because you are in the beautiful palazzo, and that was one of the greatest ballrooms in Venice, this particular ball, Palazzo Zenobio. And you see people in costumes, and there is perhaps a chamber orchestra playing Vivaldi and Corelli music at the corner, and you feel like you totally transform in time by the time machine. And the costumes and people and the characters, it just overwhelming. You're smitten by all that. Ball was incredible. Open bar with champagne, a buffet with traditional classic Venetian food perfectly prepared and everything. 5 hours non-stop of music, frivolity, people, lots of Venetian people. This was very non-touristy ball, mostly inner carnival cycle people came, and they all know each other and they kiss and hug, and it was over the top. And that was Saturday. On Sunday, we went in costumes to San Marco Square, and lots of people, Carnival goes as normal, and all of a sudden they announced through the loudspeaker that Carnival is over. It's supposed to go for 3 more days. It usually ends on Tuesday night, but it was closed because of the pandemic. At that time, it's already was going pretty badly in next region to Veneto, Lombardy, in Milano, and around Milano, they start cordoning small towns with military in order to stop epidemic from spreading. So it was the last ball. And day after, there was no more carnival. It was over. Next day, almost all tourists were gone, and Venice became unusually quiet and empty. It's always quiet after the carnival, and we cherish those times. We usually stay a week after to enjoy Venice off season, but we never saw it that empty. It was almost surreal to see everything closed. All the museums, churches, palazzos, everything was shut down. We stayed for another 8 days because our friends were there, and we had a beautiful apartment paid for, but it was a very, very, probably the strangest time I ever been to Venice. So here is the last ball. And at that point, we didn't know if the Carnival will come back, when it will be come back. In fact, it was canceled that year. It was virtual. So hopefully, maybe next year, we'll be attending another Carnival and another ball. But at that point, it was pretty sad, very sad time. We came back to New York to find pandemic already spreading here. So that's it. I don't want to finish it on a very sad note. So like I said, hopefully next year in Venice again.
Well, I would say rather than finish the presentation, there was something that when I advanced the slide to the Carnival pictures, just to remind you that we needed to move on, we ended up skipping over what we talked about, where you were going to point out some of the prints behind you that are amongst some of the works printed for other people.
Great. I'm glad you brought it up, Anna, because coming back a little bit to what I was talking about during the still life presentation, when other people saw my platinum prints and start asking me to print for them, eventually I opened a studio dedicated to art of platinum printing alone, and behind me
Arkady, hold on 1 second. So let me just say, folks, maybe for this particular moment, you might want to switch your viewer to speaker view, because then when Arkady speaks, you'll get to see him primarily, and you'll have a better ability to see the images behind him. And Arkady, I would recommend you temporarily get off the chair, because then people can get a really kind of.
All right. Okay. I can move to.
But don't move. Just get down for a little bit, and then you can get hop back
like
on.
That?
Yeah. But if you want to sort of just point out which
Okay. So eventually, without fake modesty, I should say, I've become a world expert on platinum printing. And I was, and still is, very fortunate to work with one of the greatest photographers who's around today. For example, the top image is a Marilyn Monroe, 1956, photograph by Elliot Erwitt, who was a living legend, a giant of 20th century photography. The bottom image is from the less known photographer. It's a beautiful landscape of fields in California, mid-coast California. And I work with other very famous people. And eventually, this is what happened. I did a commercial photography for the long time, specializing in photographing objects of art. But that business changed completely with the digital revolution because galleries and some artists and museums start doing it in-house. What saves the day is that I was doing platinum prints at the same time, which became my main source of income because this still in a strong demand that never will be replaced by digital. It's a unique craftsmanship which people still value and cherish. And basically that's what I'm doing today, most of the time when I'm not doing my own fine art photography.
Well, and not only is platinum printing just remarkably lusciously aesthetic, it's the most like a traditional print, which, of course, Arkady, you appreciate as somebody who's very interested in art history. But it's also timeless, in literally timeless, in that as long as the paper it's printed on, it survives forever. So, unlike other photographic forms, so it has that also that aspect of longevity and durability. So it's both the most beautiful and the most durable of the printing processes. All right. Well, I think at this point, this sort of concludes the presentation component of the program. I'm going to briefly turn the floor over to Peter, who's unmuted himself, who's my co-founder at Belarus Arts Initiative, and who's known Arkady for quite a long time, and it's through Peter that I met Arkady, and the two of them met through Mikhail Shemakin.
Yeah. And Peter was part of our Venetian crew too.
Exactly. And so Peter will ask Arkady two questions, and then after Arkady's done answering those questions, we're gonna open the floor up to your questions. So, Peter.
Well, Arkady, I have these photographs here that you can't really, any of you see properly, of an evening we spent together. And so,
I know, I remember that evening. I know exactly where it was taken.
And, these photographs of people we were with who were friends of ours and Misha and ours, and a wonderful picture, Arkady, and then I'm going to ask you something. This is a picture at the restaurant where we had dinner one night.
Oh my God.
Isn't that marvelous? I love this photograph so much, I'd like to frame it. Now,
Thank you.
Arkady, I remember, when we were all together during the day, how dense the population was all over Venice, but particularly in the Piazza San Marco and, nearby areas particularly, but walking around was, you were shoulder to shoulder with people all wearing these costumes, as was I, one designed by Tanya, Arkady's wife, marvelous costume. And we used to actually, Arkady was the only person who actually had a workable telephone that actually we could talk to. We couldn't reach anybody else, and we never knew what time or where we were supposed to be unless we called Arkady. And I had an English friend with me, Sylvia Compton Miller, and she'd always say, "Oh, we've got to call Arkady now. Arkady, we've got Arkady's number. Oh, God, thank God for Arkady." Well, anyway, Arkady, throughout all this, you were taking photographs of people in their costumes, such as we've just seen, in this beautiful platinum version. And what I wanted to ask you was, how did you manage to work with these people and who are in costume and in such a way that they wanted to be photographed, and how did you do it without sort of kidnapping them?
All right. You see, that was my approach from the beginning. I decided to make it not a reportage of the Carnival, but more like a portrait of individual Carnival characters. And it was quite challenging because, like you correctly pointed, in that incredibly dense crowd, how do you make portrait? So I try to isolate people with framing them certain way in my viewfinder, by using a shallow depth of field, by waiting for the right moment when a picture is not spoiled, but somebody walking into it in a down jacket, let's say, or something like this. And it is a challenge. On the other hand, when people see me in a Carnival costume as well, and I always work during the day in a Carnival costume, we're all in a costume. That's part of being in a Carnival with a group of friends, and so on and so forth. Those people, those Carnival enthusiasts, those characters, they feel more in common with me. The thing is, there are a million photographers who dress like quote unquote civilians, not a Carnival participant. And sometimes Carnival people feel like maybe they taken advantage of by those people, maybe for later commercial use. And they see somebody also in the Carnival costume like they are, it's like them photographing each other, like I'm part of them. So they're much more willing to participate, to cooperate. Even sometime I maybe ask him to make a step aside into arcade or something, but I'm one of them. Or if I go inside the Florian Cafe where all the best costume congregates, it's also like I'm one of them. So it helps a lot. And here comes my Carnival portraits, not a Carnival reportage, to answer your question.
Well, that's great. I wanted to also, just because we're both such friends and admirers of Mikhail Shemyak, and because you've known him for so long, I wonder if, because he's a great painter and a great artist who's been captivated by Venice for years, this relationship that he has with Venice, do you think that it's related to other aspects of his life as an artist, and you would know more about that?
Definitely relate to him growing up in Petersburg, also surrounded by water, canals, etc., etc. But it's also his long-time fascination with 18th century, which is a major theme of the Carnival. And this is what he told me. This is interesting, which you ask about it. When he came to the Carnival for the first time, of course, he'd been to Venice before, but not during the Carnival. He came first time and he saw it, and he said, I feel like that's the time I supposed to be born in, 18th century. Yes. I belong to it. It was just exactly things for him. Yeah. Back in Petersburg, way before he was able to leave Russia, he did a series of work on paper called Petersburg Carnival. So the connection is absolutely clearly there. And we got that back from him. I mean, how you cannot love Carnival? Come on, it's such a great thing. Yeah.
Yes, that's wonderful to know. Well, I think it's probably I could go on asking you questions and all kinds of things would emerge, but perhaps others among us would like to have a conversation with you too. So perhaps I should sit back and watch some other conversations. Thank you, Arkady, so much.
Thank you, Peter. It was a pleasure.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
God, it was wonderful.
Peter, yes. So I think it's time to open the floor. Just again, recapping the rules of order. If you prefer, you can send your questions through the chat, and I'll keep an eye out on the chat. Or you can, unmute yourselves and ask questions. In order to try to preserve some structure to this, I'm going to try. I think I have you all on one screen, so I'm going to try to watch out for either people waving at me, or you can go to reactions and select the raise your hand feature so that I know that you're waiting your turn to ask a question, and then I'll try to sort of, or pick on you sequentially, and we'll get to everybody as soon as possible. So I see Angelica has a reaction, but it looks like hands clapping rather than hands raised. So does, who would like to, is there anybody with a burning question for Arkady?
Angelica did raise her hand again. So yeah. She may have to say.
But she waved afterwards as well, exactly. So Angelica, the floor is yours.
Great. Arkady, I mean, we've known each other for many years, and I've known your work for many years, as we know, and I have the honor and the privilege to represent your work now is through my art advisory. So I've always been personally a fan and aesthetically and viscerally. But I just have a quick question. Maybe you could expand a bit on your love for still lifes, personally and aesthetically, viscerally, but also and how it's connected to your platinum printing in terms of getting that texture, dimensionality, and that beauty that you look for.
Like I said, I was fascinated by still lifes when I started studying art history. Always, I love still lifes. Still lifes is an interesting object to look at, because artists creating his or her small universe out of the 13 objects which communicate, talk to each other. Old classical still lifes, some of them decorative like flowers, but some of them have deep philosophical and religious meaning. And some of those meanings are lost to us. It's still a mystery what they meant by placing those subjects in a certain way. And I was always looking at them, trying to solve that mystery. In my own work, I'm not trying to recreate classical still life, but use them as an inspiration, rather, to create my own small universe at that still life setting. And when I saw that I could learn platinum printing, I thought that would be absolutely perfect medium for those still lifes, because I want them to look more like an artwork on paper than conventional photographs. What platinum does, you apply an emulsion directly to the paper. There is no gelatin involved like in traditional silver print. So the image is completely matte, opaque, lying on the surface of the paper. And as a result, and I'm using very beautiful handmade art papers made in Italy and France. As a result, the print looks more like an etching or lithographs or something like this. Also, platinum create a very strong three-dimensional feeling. You cannot tell it from the PowerPoint presentation, but when you look at actual platinum print, some objects almost like they floating, levitating above the surface of the paper. It's an amazing effect. It's one of the mysteries of platinum. It got most beautiful grayscale, tonal range. And as Anna mentioned before, it's an eternal print. It will last unchanged as long as the paper is made on, unlike any other printing techniques. So I think the marriage between platinum and the still life is a perfect marriage.
Well, yeah, the factura, the texture of the platinum prints is just really phenomenal.
Exactly. That's another thing. I'm using paper which got tooth texture. And when you look at the actual print, you can feel it. In fact, I like to frame my still lifes in so-called rays floating, when entire print, including the deckled edges, those wavy, natural wavy edges of the handmade paper are exposed. So the print itself become an object. So that's that.
Thanks, Arkady. So
You're welcome.
quick order. So Bruce had a question, so he's going to go next, and then I'll call on you, Finn, who's had his hand raised. So I see you. Okay, Bruce, go ahead.
Oh, good. Thanks, Anna. Yeah, thanks, Arkady. What interesting, what interesting things. The technology, you were starting to talk a little bit about how it's made, and I was just wondering if there's any other interesting observations about it, and also what's the limits, or what are some opportunities? You know, what can't you do now that maybe you could do, if only you could do it?
Well, I can't say only I can do it, but there are very limited, I should say, amount of people who can do platinum at the level I'm doing it. And the fact to prove it is that I have clients from all over the world who seek in my services.
Arkady, let me clarify what Bruce is asking, because Bruce is from the tech world. So I think he's talking about, if you thought of platinum printing as a technology, what are some possibilities that it opens up, maybe that have yet to have all their possibilities mined? I guess maybe that was sort of some aspect of what he may have been asking. And what are some of the useful limitations of the technology? What are some of the things that it forcibly constrains, but that are also, you know, assets in a way creatively?
Well, the assets in it creatively, for example, since I'm mixing platinum emulsion individually for each print, I'm in total control of chemicals in that emulsion, and I can alter color, contrast, everything in a very precise degrees. Of course, you can do it in Photoshop as well these days, but the difference between computer-generated print and a platinum print, that this pigment prints are not really very stable, and they're very fragile on a touch. Platinum print are very durable and again will last forever. So I have amazing degree of control in combination with a very, very permanent medium. I don't know if that answers Bruce's question.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I hope to see them. That's my other longer term question is, when can we see them, and when are we going to Venice?
You're welcome to come to my studio.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You can visit, Bruce, you can visit Arkady's studio in New York, and you know, in Boston, like, you know, we've wanted, Peter and I have wanted to bring Arkady's work to this area for an exhibition. I mean, I think there's some different ways to do it. Obviously, the pandemic has put on hold a lot of projects, but there might be some also creative kind of ways to do a pop-up project show some examples of his work. So yeah, that we can chat off of the camera about that. So okay, so I'm gonna turn the floor over now to Yefim, who's been patiently waiting. So Yefim, would you like to ask your question now? Oh, you're muted. No, actually you're not muted, but we don't hear you.
That's because my microphone is away.
Uh-huh.
Thank you. So you mentioned, Arkady, a couple of times talking about your images, the nostalgic kind of content, the attitude. I think a lot of your art has this nostalgic color to it. I think the still lives and even obviously the Venice at night, all of that kind of takes you into thinking back into life that precedes us. And you come from Odessa. I think you've never gone back to Odessa since you left it. Yes. But you're still a man from Odessa, even if you don't go back there.
I always will be.
Right. So
you can take Odessa from men, but you cannot take. You can take men from Odessa. You cannot take Odessa from.
Right.
That's what I meant to say.
Take Odessa out of the point.
Right. But Mike, tell us a little about how you think about Odessa. How is Odessa? How is that in your work? I can imagine you going there and doing Odessa at night, and it might actually look a little like Venice. I know it's different,
okay,
but
now we need full disclosure. Are you from Odessa?
I'm not. No, but Odessa is
from Odessa.
No, I'm not from Odessa, but Odessa has a name that goes beyond its residents.
Well, my dad's from Odessa, so I have a connection to Odessa myself. So
it's a very special place culturally, and I think also architecturally. It's just a move.
Exactly.
So where is Odessa in your work?
Well, where is Odessa? It's an interesting question. It's there in spirit, not in literally visual quotations, but in spirit, it's always there because there are certain areas in Odessa, for example, at least at my time, it may be changed now, but I doubt it, off-center, which were rather shabby, decaying, almost ruinous. And when I came to Venice, I saw those walls, those crumbling walls of Venice, which feel so close to my heart. When I go to the Paris, I see similarities with more polished, more luxurious center of Odessa, which was built at the same time by French and Italian architects in Beaux-Arts or neoclassical style. There is this European connection in Odessa, which always been there, which I start appreciate and realize even more when after living in Russia, I was able to travel and see the world. And I recognize little pieces of Odessa in those foreign places, like that little water fountain or things like this. I pick up and.
Do you find St. Petersburg in your work as well reflected?
Not much. No, I love Petersburg. It's one of the most visually magnificent cities in the world, but I don't have that close spiritual connection to Petersburg. I lived there for a year and a half before I decided to immigrate and drop out of academy. No, there is no connection to Petersburg.
People do call Petersburg the Venice of the North, and some people see a lot of linkages, and there's a lot of Petersburgers that had a very strong affinity for Venice, including, as we were talking the other day with you and Peter, Brodsky, of course, Diaghilev is actually buried in Sergei Diaghilev Valley.
That's right.
So there are,
Zorinsky.
and Whistler, for example, if you look at Whistler's work, and I would say some of the atmosphere in Whistler's work and the way he captured Venice, had a very interesting kind of connection to Petersburg, because Whistler had started to get his artistic education in Petersburg. So it's interesting that for you, you are really connected to Odessa, and even though you had this kind of important moment of time as relatively limited in Petersburg, it was interesting from our conversation the other day too, where you were kept on saying, well, okay, but Venice is more, Baroque, and St. Petersburg is more Rococo and neoclassical, whereas for me, I still see more visual linkages between Venice and Petersburg, even though Petersburg is also very much a stage set. It's a constructed stage set, much more so than Venice, which came about organically.
It's grander, it's wider, it's more spacious. Venice is very intimate, very, still have, even beyond Baroque, it still have a medieval feeling in those narrow streets and passages and arcade. In my mind, I don't connect them much. It may be for somebody from Petersburg, they see more connection and similarity. Of course, water and canals and everything, that's quite obvious. But to me, that's where it ends, because the spirit, the feeling is different for me. But that's very subjective and
I think,
personal.
Arkady, for you, of course, St. Petersburg, a year and a half, Odessa, the city of your parents, the city of your growing up.
That's true.
There's no comparison. But I think it's time for somebody here to commission your trip to Odessa and to create, in fact, a book about Odessa at night and finding all these walls. And I think when the lights come down, you will find your old Odessa still there.
Maybe, but you know what, to tell you the truth, I'm not eager to go there. You know what they say, you can't walk into the same river twice. That city where I grew up is changed so much, and it's gone.
You grew up in Soviet Odessa, is gone completely.
Personal connections are gone. I'm always thinking about Nabokov. He never returned to Petersburg. He was very nostalgic about his youth over there, but he never returned. His sister traveled many times. He refused to for some reason, but I can relate to that. I can understand that. He didn't want to go back into the past. Brodsky, the same thing. He never returned to Petersburg. He could. I mean, after perestroika, after breakup of Soviet Union, he could easily come back anytime, many times. He didn't want to. Think about it.
So have you been back to anywhere within the former Soviet Union?
Oh yes. I've been to Petersburg 3 times. I've been to Moscow many times. I had a client there for whom I did a lot of photography, a very famous sculptor.
So interesting. You have no problems going to Russia. It's really Odessa specifically that you kind of have
exactly
a feeling about.
I have reservations about that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, my father, who grew up in Odessa and then moved to Leningrad when he married my mother's sort of a native Petersburger. Neither of them's been back anywhere over there. And so, when I started traveling to Russia in 2007, they kind of were very stressed out about it. Then they kind of got a little more used to it, but they have no desire to go back at all. And it's a combination of their feelings about the place and some of the people behind it and some of the complicated politics of that, but it's also at the same time is going back to a place that they were happy in, that they'd had so many rich experiences, and all of that culture and life that they experience is really erased. So it's a very different place now, which was much of an issue for me. I mean, for me, it was fascinating because I did remember Petersburg, vaguely remembered Odessa, but I haven't been back to Odessa actually. But I did have a lot of memories of Petersburg, and I had some weird sensations. The first time I went to Petersburg, I ended up in some areas where I didn't really know the city well enough geographically. I remembered places that I'd been, like snapshots from my childhood, but I didn't know how they were connected. And I'd end up in these places and I'd have this strange feeling when I was there. And then eventually I'd figure out that this was close to some place that I used to go to. And so it was, I enjoyed it. I found it thrilling and fun, but I didn't have all those complicated feelings about it.
I have to just say that I just can't stop myself from saying this, and I'm sorry to intervene so much, but I did go to Odessa when I was 17.
Oh, really?
And yes,
That's
did.
one of the time when I was living there.
You were there. You were there, Arkady. That
Yeah, because I left in 79.
Well, this was 59. I hate to tell you, but nevertheless, we were there at the same time. And you know, you never forget Odessa. I will never forget what it was like to be in Odessa and what it looked like. The steps and also the streets, and things were a little shabby in those days, it seemed,
Oh,
to
yeah.
somebody from the West. But I remember sitting through a Rimsky-Korsakov opera that lasted for 4 hours, and things like that stay with you.
Isn't that opera house magnificent? The Odessa Opera House, one of the most beautiful in the world. And it's not my opinion, it's a general opinion.
Yeah, I remember. And I remember
this similar to the Opera Garnier, actually. Yeah.
A little bit outside, yeah, maybe, but it's unique. It's unique. Yeah.
Well, the Opera Garnier is pretty special, so I think it's a complimentary comparison.
Oh, definitely, definitely.
You know,
it's right there with Garnier and Vienna Stadtoper, and yeah.
But the thing is that, yeah, I mean, what's interesting, Odessa, I mean, Odessa definitely has a strong French influence.
Oh, yeah.
Particularly
Huge.
strong. And the thing is, I mean, port cities in general, obviously, are different in their cosmopolitanism and diversity, but Odessa really was special in Russian imperial times and in Soviet times. There was a kind of a degree of freedom and mixing, and that was a little different than in other parts that were more tightly controlled, because they were closer to the power centers, but also because international commerce didn't go through them in such a way. Whereas in Odessa, even in Soviet times, when things were relatively tightly controlled, still you had, you know, these ships coming in, there was trade, there was exchange. You know, my dad had access to like Western records in the 70s, and he wasn't, you know,
exactly
forged in his access. Yeah. All right. Well, let's maybe open the floor again to some other folks if other people have questions. You know, who else has got a question for Arkady? Trisha, are you reaching for the, no? Yeah. You look like you're fighting with your computer. Yeah. Okay. I'm clicking, asking you to unmute. So hopefully, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I simply want to thank you because I'm very familiar with Venice at night. Also, I quite enjoyed the photographs, not only of the Carnival, but the streets, the alleys at night. And I feel like where that particular water fountain is, I know there are several in the city, but I was very touched to see some of those photographs. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure, especially someone who knows Venice. Are you going there often?
I used to, yes, I used to. If you can believe it, for someone who really hates to drive now, I used to drive from Munich to Venice every long weekend. So
wow.
I've been there a lot. That's an 8-hour trip. Beautiful though, I love it. Anyway.
Thank you so much. My
Thank
pleasure.
you. It was really a pleasure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Who else? Does anybody want to wave at me or raise a hand? Who wants a turn? I'm trying to. Okay, hold on. I'm seeing something in the chat. Oh, okay, that's just Efim. Okay. Well, while you guys gather your thoughts and come up with. Oh, Masha, do you want to ask a question? Was that?
Yeah. I just thought of one question.
Please.
Arkady, first, of course, thank you so much for your wonderful magnificent works. It
Oh
was the
my
most
God.
interesting part of the story. My question is, you mentioned that you worked at Shemakin Studio, right?
Yes.
For a while. Did you work with some other artists in New York as well, or just only Shemakin?
No. It's a funny story. I met Shemyakin because I was working on Vysotsky project, and Shemyakin was a close friend of Vysotsky. That's how we met. And that was his first year when he relocated from Paris to New York, and he needed an assistant and somebody who can speak English, because my English was limited, but his was zero. And he also needed a photographer because he's very meticulous to recording every work of his. Not even a small drawing would be leaving his studio without being professionally photographed. So in yours truly, he found an assistant, an interpreter, and a photographer in one person. And I worked for him full-time for almost 3 years before I enrolled at Parsons. But we almost immediately became a very close friends. It was a friendship of the first sight. And we remain friends till these days. For 40 years now. He's a dear, dear friend, and just person who made a tremendous influence on my life. My mentor.
What do you do for Vysotsky project? Are you talking about the documentary about like
No.
Some different thing?
No, I came to New York the year Vysotsky died, and I was approached mistakenly by the local small publisher. There was a writer, Arkady Lvov. He found my name in a phone book. He assumed that I'm a writer. I told him I'm not a writer. I actually happen to have a number of that person. I gave it to him, but I said, I love Vysotsky all my life. I'm a photographer. If you need maybe a cover for the book design or something like this, call me. He called me and he convinced me to work on that project of Vysotsky's compiled poetry because the writer declined. And we published first ever book of Vysotsky poetry with that person. When I met Shemyakin, it's a long story, I tried to make it short. When I met Shemyakin, it's turned out that he was in possession of entire Vysotsky archive on microfilm, photographed by Marina Vladi, not by her, she hired a photographer, of course, right after Vysotky's death, because they were afraid that those archives would be confiscated by KGB. So Marina gave him those negatives. We printed 1,500 photographs of Vysotsky's manuscripts. And from those, we made 3-volume compiled Vysotsky, almost academic publishing of Vysotsky's book, and I was deeply involved. But that came years later. Initially, I came to Shemyakin studio to get a photograph for the book cover, for that first book cover. And that's how I met. That's all. Somebody told me that Vysotky's friend living in New York and he must have a good photograph of him, which he did.
Very good story. Thank you so much. It was
You're very welcome.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Arkady, actually following up a little bit though on Masha's question, because you said that for a while you were taking a lot of photographs of art. That was part of your business, was taking photographs of artists' work, right? Or for dealers or for whoever. So maybe you never worked specifically for an artist as in depth again as you did for Shemyakin. But were there any artists or galleries that you worked with when you were photographing artworks?
A lot. Tons.
I mean, I'm sure there were, but I guess the question is, were there any that particularly stood out, that are particularly unusual or interesting?
Well, nobody world famous, but lots of New York artists, lots of Russian artists who live in New York, but not only, lots of American artists as well. That was my, I was specializing in it. That's the niche I was exploring, and I developed quite big clientele among galleries and artists. I would go to artist studio with my equipment and photograph paintings and sculptures and works on paper, jewelry. I have some jewelers who were my clients. It was a big business until there was not.
Well, but Arkady, so what were some of the New York-based Russian artists that you worked with in that period of time?
Well, besides Shemyakin, Augstein, I went to Paris. I photographed entire huge catalog for Oleg Tselkov. I photograph in Paris. I also work a lot in Paris. I have a part of my family there, so I would come every summer. I photograph Rabin's work. I photograph collections of different collectors of Russian art. Alexander Glazer collection.
I would point out, Arkady, that Tselkov and Rabin are world famous.
Yeah, no, I mean, I meant from American artists. Nobody like I don't know, Motherwell or whatever. But in Russian world, almost everybody who's anybody. So lots of people. So yeah, it was an interesting experience to meet those people, to know all of them. Some of them would become friends. I was friends with Rabin for many years. Whenever I would come to Paris, me and my wife would visit his studio. Tselkov, the same thing. I went to his studio many times. Zaborov was a very close friend. Boris, exactly.
Yeah.
Lots of people. Wow.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I believe that Oscar Rabin is one of the best artists of our time. So you're
absolutely, without doubt.
Yeah. So I'm just very happy to hear this. You also worked with him. I
photographed his works also in New York because his daughter was living in Queens. So Katya, so I photographed a lot of his work there. It was a big part of my life. Not
did
just
Did you photograph a lot of the artists whose work was shown in Ginny's gallery?
Oh yeah, that's how I met Angelica. She was the director of Ginny's gallery for 10 years, and I was the main photographer for that gallery.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
The wonderful photographs of the works of people like Nemtsov and so forth. I used to get them regularly. Those are all photographs.
Yeah, it's all mine. Every catalog, sculptures too. Alexander Ney, who's a brilliant sculptor, his work, lot. So
Arkady,
hi.
Hi, I did not know how to raise a hand, so I'm just jumping in. Sorry.
I'm glad you did.
When you did all the photographed artworks, how did you print them then? Did you also do platinum prints or?
No. First of all, platinum is the only black and white medium. Most of the work was done on slides and transparencies. Because at that time, now of course it's completely technology changed a lot, but at that time, slides were considered the source for the book printing, or even for presentation. Yes. So I photograph everything from 35mm slides up to 8x10 transparencies.
Yes.
20 by 24 centimeter transparencies. I was traveling around the world with my view camera, big holders, everything. It was quite an operation. But yes, that was the main thing. Sometimes people would ask for prints, and in this case, I would do both slides and color negatives, from which later color prints would be made.
I see.
Yeah.
And slides, you didn't make the slides. That's laboratories which made that.
Yeah, I would photograph on reversible film, slide film, give it to the lab, and they would process it, and I would give it to a client. So simple as that. But slides require, unlike negatives, they require an absolute precision in color and in exposure. So there is a certain art of making a perfect slides of the artwork. When it comes to photography and sculpture, it's more creative because you define that sculpture with your light.
Yeah.
So, and that's where it goes both ways. My experience with still lifes came handy, but also the lighting, which I experimented with photographing sculptures, helped me with my still lifes as well. So that was mutual benefit.
Well, everybody, it's 6:50 already, so we've kind of gone on for quite a good presentation. I think it's generally time to wrap up, but if somebody has one last burning question. Hello? Okay. Okay. So is there somebody who has a final question that they would like to ask? Why don't you unmute yourself now and sort of go for it? Otherwise, we'll kind of wrap this up because we need to stop recording at 6:55 for certain technical reasons. So does anybody have a last question? No. Well, we've Arkady's shared so many wonderful stories. I think, and we could go on for a very long time. So maybe another time we will. But I just first of all just want to thank Arkady so much for all his work in preparing this. This was actually Arkady's very first time giving a talk on Zoom, and we had to sort of work out a system where I put the presentation together and I had to advance it, and then Arkady could speak about it, which is why we had a little bit of that technical issue at the beginning where he thought I was going a little fast. So anyway, but this I think went very, very smoothly, and Arkady's becoming a pro at Zoom. So
thank you. And if I can say some parting words, I want to thank you, Anna, so much for creating this event. And I also want to thank Angelica for representing my work so brilliantly, so beautifully, with so much care and attention. And thank you guys for listening to me. Thank you all for being here. And hopefully I'll see you all in person soon.
And thank you
so
Peter
much
for introducing us too. Peter.
Yeah. What a great pleasure that has turned out to be.
Well,
thank you.
Maybe one of these days we'll be able to do a whole project with you, Arkady. But in the meantime,
I'd love that. In the meantime, let's stay connected, either through Anna, or you can check my website, platinumeditions.com. Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Wonderful.
Everybody have a great rest of your evening, and be well, be safe. Take care.
Ciao for now.
Thank you.